It's great to welcome to the program Reese Peck, Associate Professor at the City University of New York, also author of the book Fox Populism, Branding Conservatism as Working Class. He recently published a very interesting op-ed in The Hill called Trump, the UFC, and the New Conservative Culture War. You know, Reese, I'm really interested in talking about this because these UFC events that Donald Trump attends alongside UFC owner Dana White, and the crowd seems to go crazy for Trump. I'm very interested in how UFC has become this sort of cultural flashpoint for the American right wing. Because I'll be honest, like I grew up in a liberal area, so I had friends that like UFC. They're all liberal, so it's not the case that UFC is objectively only appealing to right-wing people. And yet the events and the embracing of Trump, and even by the fighters to some degree, seem to be doing something culturally that I want to talk more about with you. So like, give us an overview of what you think is going on here with UFC and Trump and MAGA.
Yeah, I'll start by saying I'm a lifelong UFC fan. I wrestled in high school. I watched it back in the Blockbuster video days when you couldn't even get it on pay-per-view. And you're right that it wasn't historically just like coded as Republican partisan, sport. It celebrated its diversity because it's a global sport. It celebrated that it has women fighters, right? And many of them are LGBTQ members of the LGBTQ community. So it really wasn't till 2016 where it became explicitly coded as kind of Republican aligned when Dana White spoke at the Republican National Convention, right, supporting Trump. And it's been off to the races in terms of partisan politics since that moment. That was really like the juncture where it shifted and became kind of explicitly conservative.
And why is it that that has worked when, you look at Major League Baseball and there's sort of this America's pastime and connections to a lot of different cultural events in history that don't necessarily code as liberal. Like you could make the case that maybe Major League Baseball should be more visibly conservative, or college football is a tradition that is bigger in parts of the country that vote way more for Republicans than they do Democrats in general, on average, down in the South. Like, why is it that it has started to lean this way with regard to the public-facing UFC audience and their reception of Trump?
It's a tricky question to answer. I think that those sports that you mentioned, they have kind of like a throwback to the network era of television where they're still trying to appeal to a mass audience. They don't
Mm.
want to alienate one group or the other. So it's really, I mean, we live in a world of niche TV markets and niche online video markets, right? That's really where you have hardcore fans. They're small, but they're loyal, and you can make money off them because they're fanatic, they're into the brand. And I think the UFC really came of age in the social media era, right? Because it was seen deviant and it was outlawed in a lot of states, right? John McCain famously called it a human cockfighting sport, and it was banned. So it really was not getting any love from network or cable television. So it had to lean into social media much more to circumvent the kind of gatekeepers. And it's always had a kind of countercultural like vibe to it because it has seen cage fighting, and it's kind of beyond the pale. It's outside of the realm of legitimate sports.
Mm.
And it's gradually kind of tried to do this tightrope of becoming mainstream, getting contracts with ESPN, right? Enjoying the benefits of mainstream broadcasting and mainstream sports and branding. But at the same time, it hasn't escaped that early origin as a countercultural kind of deviant extreme sport that a special fan base likes. So I think it's that's already kind of baked in, and then you add partisan politics to it, and it adds another kind of layer of that niche branding.
It seems that there is definitely some overlap in terms of some of the fan base of UFC and those who like characters from the so-called manosphere influencers, the Tate brothers and others. I mean, Andrew Tate was a kickboxer. I don't know that he was ever in UFC specifically, but he was a kickboxer at one point. So it seems that there is, if we want to draw an analogy to what pseudo-political movement does UFC most connect to, other than the presence of Dana White and Trump as individuals, Is there some overlap with the manosphere appeal?
Absolutely. I mean, we really need to pause and think about what does it mean that one of the most Googled people in, the last 2 years, Andrew Tate, started his career in kickboxing, right? And what that says to you is that it has social currency to be in combat sports for young men
Mm.
particularly, right? And that is an apolitical thing that can lead to ideological conclusions, right? It starts out as that's why you like him, but then he's starting to engage in political commentary about society, about gender, about the sexual marketplace, right? And so it's one thing for a professor like me to speak to young men. They're like, don't listen to this guy, right? I don't really respect that type of culture and that type of authority, but I do respect a guy that has this courage to go into a cage and fight another man. And it really does speak to, in another way, we live in a world of hyper media saturation where we think everything's fake, everything's a simulation, and there's nothing more real and authentic than a fight, right? So there's something about fighting, particularly that speaks to our kind of postmodern existence, where we kind of believe we see everything as like smoke and mirrors. We see everything as fake and staged, and so that we latch on to the things that are real. And people like Tate, Joe Rogan, right, has a background in mixed martial arts. The other most popular kind of one of the most popular online personalities in the world. So I really think, progressives particularly have to think about that. Like, where are progressives gaining their cultural currency in politics? And the right has definitely latched on to this idea. Tate once called himself an action hero, right? So he really lives up to this idea of a courageous fighter, a guy that's a manly man, alpha male.
Trump and some of the manosphere influencers will often try to portray themselves as really powerful and alpha, but also victims of just about everything. We've talked about Trump before, and Trump's the victim of a rigged election system and of a weaponized justice system, and the media treats him unfairly, and regulators treat him unfairly, and social media and cultural, Hollywood treats him unfairly. The manosphere influencers, including the Tates, but also many others, the platforms are limiting our speech, and then they're going after us in Romania on trumped up charges as far as the Tates go. It's simultaneously we are victimized by everyone, but we're also alpha and really powerful. Is that appealing to their followers in some way? Because you'd think that if everyone can so easily turn them into victims, it runs counter to being alpha in some way.
Yeah, I mean, I've kind of grappled with this contradiction. I think maybe this is an overly simplistic answer, but I think it really boils down to underdog stories that that in our kind of pop culture and politics, populist candidates will use this underdog story where on one hand, they are courageous and alpha, but on the other hand, they have to be under siege, right? There has to be some sort of villain, right? Like a superhero movie, right? It's only as good as the villain, right? So they're always saying there's this idea of a power block, an establishment, right? That is suppressing regular people. And then Trump and the Tates of the world are like the proxies, they're the avatars for like what the regular guy is going through, right? And they're kind of guiding them out and taking on this heroic crusade against the powerful. But it is ironic because you could flip it as well, where they say liberals are the weakest people, and yet they're also the people dominating them. And the same contradiction works on the backside of the coin.
It seems one of the other aspects to the manosphere in general is economic struggles and more complicated dynamics are often supplanted with explanations like feminism, woke culture, DEI, etc., as explanations for why things maybe aren't going as well as some would hope. Do you think that that's an effective strategy in terms of activating people, or not?
Yeah, this is one thing I try to get at in the piece that I really don't want. I think there's a typical way to approach the manosphere and Trump's kind of hyper masculinity, which is to simply say, look how vulgar it is, look how reductive and reactionary and despicable it is. But people, that's like a surface level analysis of their rhetoric. When you dig deeper into it, you find out they're talking a lot about the economy. They're talking a lot about the struggles of the labor market, about what it is to have dignity, right, today, if you can't get a good job and that you're not attractive as a marriage partner, right? You work at, a service industry job, you can't buy a home, right? So they interweave the realities, the hard realities of our economy and how it's hard to find status and dignity in the economy. And so I don't want people kind of look at the incels or the people that like this content and they just dismiss them as bigots and gross reactionaries, but they don't really have any other empathetic, like a more empathetic lens or approach to them that could see why people are lonely, could see why people are lacking meaning in their life and struggling. And what the manosphere does is say, yes, I see you. I see that you're struggling in the sexual marketplace to find a marriage partner. I see that you're finding a good job, but then they redirect and say it's women, right? The problem is that women have too much power, right? It's with their high credentials and this new pop culture that platforms them and centers their voices the most. They're the enemy, right? Not these deeper economic forces at play that are really the core of your hardship, right? And so it's that maneuver that they do. It's that redirection that I'm interested in.
So if we loop this back to the UFC stuff, is there some way in which some of the folks in that group you just mentioned, with the struggles you just mentioned, where being part in some way as an audience member, especially if you can afford to go in person, scratches that itch that you're describing and connects to it in some kind of relevant way psychologically?
Yeah, I think so. It's like if you feel like all these systems around you are out of your control, one thing you can control is your fitness, right? You can control like training and jujitsu or fighting. Like these are things that are immediately attainable, that you see transformation. Um, and I don't necessarily think those things are toxic. It's the way the kind of right weaponizes them that lead them to toxic kind of conclusions, right?
Mm.
It's like I have to be a dominating man, this like ultra aggressive guy, and they narrowly define what it means to be a man, or they narrowly define what masculinity is. That's the problem, not masculinity per se. It's their kind of warped version of it and reductive version of it. And so that's what I think. It does scratch an itch, but it's like, how are you scratching that itch, and what's the political significance, and how is that an entry point into either, I would say, good politics and good ideas and good solutions, or more reactionary, unhelpful, toxic kind of directions.
When it comes to the November election, obviously it's very hard to say when an election will come down to probably under 500,000 votes in 3 to 5 states. And there's no one thing ultimately that is going to be definitively pointed to as a difference maker. But is UFC and the environment that's being built around Trump, is it even conceivably significant enough, if we include all of these other outcroppings of it, to influence the election results in maybe even a single state? Or is this really an artifact of social media that, in the same way that in 2020, if you looked at Reddit, you would have thought Bernie would easily be the nominee, and it turns out it didn't really represent the majority of the Democratic Party? Is it similarly deceptive to see what's going on in social media with Trump and UFC and think this is where the culture is right now?
I mean, it's a great question, and I struggle with prognostication. I like diagnosis better, but I'll just say this: I'm alarmed. I'm surprised by the fact that more progressives are not waking up to this, or they're
Hmm.
not seeing how important this is. I mean, George Wallace, the Alabama governor, was very smart at using country music radio demographics and markets, and then planned his campaigns around those. You can
Right.
convert these entertainment markets into powerful political constituencies. This is what Trump is doing, and it's very, and people used to look down on country music as a joke when Bush was using it, right? The liberal Hollywood set were like, oh, who listens to Brooks and Dunn? Guess what? A lot of people listen to Brooks and Dunn, and a lot of people like UFC. My own son is obsessed with it, right? So I think I can't say for sure. Obviously, this is going to be the deciding factor. But what I am kind of concerned about is that it seems like everyone is sleeping on this. Everyone is just
Mm.
like not realizing he has been at 6 events. It's unprecedented. Since April 23 to now, he's been at 6 separate pay-per-view events. I mean, I can't think, I tried to kind of do research before this, where there's ever been a president that's attended this many sporting events, and I couldn't find a parallel. Obama, sometimes college basketball, but it's really so it's like we don't really have a case, a previous case to test how effective this is going to be. We can look at music with George Wallace and other kind of ways in which politicians have used popular culture and entertainment to build their constituencies. But I'm just kind of concerned about it, and I'm wondering why everyone is kind of missing this story.
That's a good question, and one we're going to keep talking about. We've been speaking with Professor Reese Peck, Associate Professor at the City University of New York. We're linking to his book as well as the article. Reese, really appreciate your time and insights.
Yeah, thank you, David.